Welcome to the High School Preview Show presented by Gold Athletics. I'm your host, John Serenitas. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, Tyler Emerald. Adam Kirkshin is once again on assignment. Tyler, how are you this evening?
Doing great, John.
Thanks for taking the time, man. It's hard to believe we're already into week two. I make it sound like we're into week 9, but we are into week 2 here. And we had a good start last week, a lot of good games in Massachusetts, a lot of good games in New England in general. There's some even bigger games this week, and we're going to preview some of the games in the MIA and some of the top out-of-state matchups as well. Before we do that, I do want to remind you that we are brought to you by Gold Athletics. Coaches, if you're in the market for a fundraiser that is efficient, effective, and can raise good money, then you need to go to goldathletics.com. Matt Ross and his team have the experience you need to get you into a fundraiser that works for you, your program, and your community. Visit goldathletics.com today for more information and how you can get started on your fundraising journey. All right, Tyler, so of course we are going to start here in the lovely state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth. We've got a lot of big games this weekend. And we're going to start off with Western Mass versus Eastern Mass here. We have Springfield Central visiting Lawrence on Friday night to take on Central Catholic. Springfield Central coming off a loss to Iona Prep. Central Catholic coming off a 21-14 win over Franklin, and what ended up being a nail-biter after they jumped on Franklin early. Just some thoughts on this one. Obviously, Springfield Central played a really good Iona Prep team. Iona Prep has beaten them 2 years in a row. But now that Springfield Central is into the Massachusetts slate, we still think they're going to be one of the better teams in Division I. This is an opportunity for them to flex their muscle a bit.
For sure. I think Springfield Central is one of the better teams in the state, if not the best team in the state. Of course, Iona Prep, that was a difficult matchup for them. I was expecting it to be a little bit closer than it was, but overall, that's a really tough matchup. There's no team in Massachusetts as good as Iona Prep. Central Catholic, Caden Smith, he impressed, multiple rushing scores. They have a really good sophomore class. So I don't think the Raiders are quite there yet. I think they will get back to contention or contending in Division I eventually within these next couple of years. I just don't think the time is now for them. Springfield Central, they've been building to this moment for a couple of years now. That team that lost at Gillette a couple of years ago, a lot of sophomores played. Then they're now seniors. Team's loaded with FCS kids, a couple of FBS kids as well. So I think the Eagles are probably the most talented team in Massachusetts, and I like them here. I just think the Raiders are a little too young.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think their youth is going to be a problem in this game. It kind of reared its ugly head in the second half of last week's game against Franklin when Franklin almost came back to tie it. A late turnover sealed the deal for the Raiders. As far as Springfield Central is concerned, you talk about Jarrett Stain, you got Rogers at running back. They've got a lot of talent. And, yeah, I think you make a good point. Iona Prep would probably be the number one team in Massachusetts. They're that good. I'm not sure that they're a barometer or a measuring stick, if you will, for Springfield Central. I think we're going to get a better idea of what they're going to be now moving forward. Of course, they've got Central Catholic. They got Xaverian on the horizon. So we're going to get a pretty good idea in the coming weeks of what this Springfield Central team is going to be. I think that when you look at Central Catholic, I think that they're coming. They're going to get back to contender status in Division I. I don't think, to your point, I don't think they're there quite yet, though. I like Springfield Central in this one as well. All right, next up, we have Mansfield at Duxbury. Mansfield coming off an impressive 45-14 win over Everett. Duxbury coming off a shootout win against Abington. Duxbury beat Mansfield in Mansfield last year in a game we covered that was actually a pretty good game. You know, when I look at this Mansfield team, Tyler, they're young. I mean, this senior class hasn't played a lot, but they've got a really good junior class, and they've got a good sophomore class as well. This was a bit of a surprise, and I know a lot of people will look at that score and say, they did that to Everett. Well, this isn't your father's Everett teams either, with all due respect to where the program is right now. That was a good win for Mansfield, but they're going to have their hands full with Duxbury this week.
For sure, they're going to have their hands full. That was one of the more surprising results. Like, I know it's not the Everett of years past. Like, it's not the 2016 Everett team with multiple NFL players, but it's still Everett. There's still talent. I mean, this is a team that went 7-1 in the regular season last year. So
it's still
a
a good program. And that's why
right.
I said they might not be what they were under John DiBiase, but they're still a good program.
For sure. There's still a lot of talent there. And so, like, I thought the game would be close. I think I picked Everett last week. So I was pretty surprised to just see how it was so lopsided. But Mansfield, I think they're kind of flying under the radar, which I'm sure Mike Redding likes there in Division III. It's a wide open division this year. So I think Mansfield could definitely come out on top. Duxbury, on the other hand, it's always so hard to bet against them. Like, I thought they beat Abington last week. It was a little shaky there in the first half, and then they really just kind of relied on that running game. And Jack Reese scored 5 touchdowns, taking over for Alex Barlow in the backfield. So I think Reese, his emergence, that's going to be key. They always have a tough offensive line. Trevor Jones, one of the better players in the state. So it's really tough to pick against Duxbury. We were just talking about this with Adam yesterday, and I picked Mansfield. I've already flip-flopped on this. I like Duxbury by a score here.
Yeah, I think Mansfield has always been a program that can win on the road. Mike Redding has done a terrific job of coaching his teams up through the years. They play well at home and away. I have no doubt that they're going to play well this week. I just think that Duxbury does have a slight advantage. It's a long bus ride. They're at home. They're a program that year in and year out, they don't rebuild, they reload. It's another one of those years where coming into the season, even though they had Barlow last year, they were flying under the radar a little bit. Kind of the same thing going into this season, flying under the radar a little bit. You mentioned Reese, he had the 5 touchdowns last week. I think this is one of those games where I think that for Mansfield to win it, they're going to need to get off to a good start and carry the play. And they're going to need to put pressure on Duxbury, get them into situations where they have to throw the ball. They don't want to do that. Coach Landolfi wants to run the football, play good defense. That's how he wants to win. That's how they won the Super Bowl last year. If Mansfield can do that, I think they have a shot. I think it's going to be tough to do, though. It's hard to go on the road and win at a place like Duxbury. I think it's going to be a good game, close game like last year. I'm going Duxbury here. And, of course, Mike Redding was the Patriots Coach of the Week this week, by the way. So congratulations to Coach Redding. Truly a legend. I mean, he's pushing 300 wins here. One of the best to ever do it. So we want to congratulate him on that honor. And it's a big deal, by the way. I mean, in 2011, I was fortunate enough to be Patriots Coach of the Week after we beat Natick in week 2. And it's a pretty cool experience. So hats off to Coach Redding. All right, next up we got Needham at Natick. Speaking of Natick, of course, Needham coming off an impressive 24-0 win over Milton. Natick beat Newton North in week 1. And look, this is an old school Bay State rivalry game. This Needham program, Tyler, is very impressive. And I love this matchup. We've talked about the resurgence of the Bay State League the last 2 years. Games like this, that they excite me because I coached in the Bay State League for a long time. So I love seeing matchups like this. Like I said, it's an old school league matchup. You got Needham, who might have outside of Springfield Central, probably has the best public school shot to win a D1 title. And you got Natick, who, Mark Mortarelli, year in and year out, they're going to be in it. And they're kind of flying under the radar. But this Natick team is certainly good enough to give Needham fits. And if Needham doesn't come to play or looks past them, they could end up getting upset.
Yeah, you mentioned the kind of resurgence here of the Bay State League. It is really cool to see. Last week we saw another one of these games where Needham beat Milton. And last year you saw Milton win the state championship. And Walpole, they played Walpole in the state championship. And it's like the list goes on. Weymouth and their resurgence. So it is good to see this league playing some top tier football again. I think Natick, I think they are kind of flying under the radar, right? Like I think they're going to be a playoff team, but probably like that 12, 13 seed in Division I, something like that. But they're going to be a team that nobody wants to play in the first round. I just don't think anyone in the Bay State conference can beat Needham this year. And like I think all of us picked them to beat Milton last week, but the shutout of Steve Dembowski team, that's super impressive. They beat them 24-0, Aiden Williams, picking up where Tate Hoffmeister left off, running for 3 touchdowns, in addition to being probably the best linebacker in the state. Will McDonald, a game wrecker on the defensive line there for the Rockets. So I think this will be a tough competitive game. I just don't think Natick's going to be able to put up enough points. I think it's going to be something like 21-7 Rockets.
Yeah, the emergence of this Needham program has been impressive. And last offseason, I had Coach Kops go on the coaches chat, and to see the job that he and that staff has done. Look, I've coached against Needham for years, and that program for a long time in the Bay State League was steady Eddie. In other words, you knew they ran the same things for years. You knew that you were going to get 21 personnel. You were going to get, you get some eye stuff. You were going to get some West Coast passing concepts, wide delay, things like that. They might get into 11 personnel and spread you out a little bit. On defense, you were going to get a 4-4. They were going to play fundamentally sound. They were going to take good pursuit angles. You might get a 50 as a changeup, but Needham, for the most part, has been a program through the years that has run the same stuff. They've had from Roy Johan to Dave Duffy, now to Doug. They've just had consistency. They know what they're doing. They run what they run well, and they're always competitive. And so it's great to see Needham football back in this place. And I'm partial to it because I've coached against those guys for years, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for them. And to see what Doug has done there now as a Needham alumnus, it's pretty cool to see. I think this is going to be a good game, though. I've known Mark Mortarelli for a long time, too. We go back a ways. I think Mort will have his guys ready to play, but I do think Needham is better here. Next up, we have Marblehead at King Philip. Marblehead coming off a 25-6 loss to Bishop Fenwick. KP coming off a 42-14 win over Walpole. And look, I'll say this. On paper, King Philip will be favored here. But one thing about Marblehead is Jim Rudloff's a good coach. He'll have his team ready to play. They've got players over there. It was week 1. They didn't play well. They scored on the opening drive and then kind of struggled on offense from there. If you're KP, you can't take these guys lightly because they're well coached. And like I said, they've got enough talent where they can come in and cause problems. And if you're not on your A game, you can end up on the wrong side of the ledger.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I thought that game was going to go differently last week. Like, I thought it was going to be competitive, sort of a toss-up type of game between Fenwick and Marblehead. I definitely didn't see that 25-6 defeat happening for the Magicians. But you mentioned Jim Rudloff, and kind of similar last year. They were kind of started off slow, and then they got better as the year progressed, and then they ended up winning a round in the D4 playoffs. So I think they're going to be a good team, and I think they're going to get better, and I think they will be a playoff team again this year. But as you know, John, the King Philip team, they're going to play good defense, solid line play, and they're going to be able to run the ball. And I don't think any team in the state has the stable of backs that King Philip has. Like, there's legitimately 4 guys that could run for 100 yards and a couple of touchdowns any given week. We kind of saw that last week against Walpole, and we know the defense is going to be tough. In my estimation, it was the best defense in the state last year. Talking about KP, I think it's going to be a top 5 defense throughout this year as well. So I think Marblehead is going to be a good team. I think they're going to be a playoff team. I just think KP's too good, too deep, and I think the defense is just too fundamentally sound to really get beat in this one. So I like KP by a few scores.
And as always, I said this last week, I'm going to say it again. I am going to be sitting out KP games. From a prediction standpoint, I am coaching there again in a part-time capacity, so I am going to be sitting this one out. All right, next up you have Andover at Shrewsbury. Andover coming off a tough 40-17 loss to a very good Pinkerton team. And look, I was asked about that game by somebody earlier in the week, and I said, if you've watched Brian Riley's teams through the years, the Astros run as good a wing tee as anybody I've seen in all my years of coaching and being around the game of football in New England. I mean, I covered them 2 years ago at Brockton, and they put on a wing tee clinic. Brockton had no idea what was going on. That score surprised people, but Pinkerton has always been one of the perennial powers in New Hampshire. It didn't surprise me. I mean, it's a hard offense to prepare for, and while Andover brought back some good talent, that was a tough first week 1 matchup for them when you have to go up against an offense like that. Shrewsbury, of course, coming off a loss to Hudson. Both teams are looking for a win here. How do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, I'll start by saying I love these cross-sectional matchups. The cross-sectional matchups in the interstate matchups, I love them, and I hope we continue to see more of them.
It's amazing to me, Tyler, how many I'd like to think at New England Football Journal, we're pretty good at having our pulse on New England football, and it's hard to keep up now. I mean, you're getting New Hampshire, Rhode Island games, New Hampshire, Massachusetts games, Massachusetts, Rhode Island games. Like, I want to see more Massachusetts, Connecticut.
I do too.
It's fantastic. I mean, I'm hoping, to your point, that we continue to see more.
Yeah, just kind of speaking of those interstate games too, is Hendricken has what, Greenwich and Fairfield, right? So
Granite, yeah, Hendricken has a bye this week. Then they come back from the bye. They play Greenwich in a week from Friday. But then later on this season, they go to Fairfield Prep, and that's an Alliance game down in Connecticut. So, yeah, it's those are fantastic matchups, and they're good matchups. Those are going to be good games. I mean, Hendricken they're going to be able to compete in those games. So it's just great to see. You got Londonderry in the Prep this week. It's good stuff. Last week you had BC High and LaSalle, which was a really good game. You like to see it.
Yeah, Central was a Central against Manchester.
Central out of Providence plays at Milton this week.
Yeah. So it is awesome. I love to see it, and I hope we continue to see it and see more of it. But Andover, Shrewsbury, two teams that kind of are coming off humbling losses. You mentioned Pinkerton, very good team. And then Hudson's a very good team as well. Lower division school, but I think that was a consensus pick last week was Hudson over Shrewsbury. They may be just D6, but they're very talented. So I think Shrewsbury and Andover, they're kind of in similar spots. They're bigger schools, Division I schools, proud football schools that have a history of winning and history of success. I think ultimately Andover probably has a little bit more skill, so I'm leaning Andover here, but I think it's going to be a competitive game. I don't think it's going to be a blowout like we saw last week. I think something like 28-21.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning that way too. It's great to see Eastern Mass versus Central Mass here. And I props to Shrewsbury. I mean, they have the last 3 years in particular, they've really expanded their schedule. They've played teams in Eastern Mass. You'll like to see it. I think this is going to be a close game too. It'll be interesting to see how Andover bounces back from a tough loss like that. I'm leaning Andover here, but Shrewsbury is physical enough, and I think they're skilled enough that if they come to play and can keep it close into the fourth quarter, this is going to be a close game either way. I can also see them winning it. It's going to be a fun matchup and certainly one to keep an eye on this weekend. You are watching the High School Preview Show presented by Gold Athletics. I'm your host, John Sirenitas. As always, I'm joined by Tyler Amaral. Adam Kirkshin is on assignment. We do want to remind you that if you're a coach looking for a fundraiser, visit goldathletics.com today. Matt Ross and his team have a variety of fundraising options that can help you raise money quickly and connect with your community. Visit goldathletics.com today for more information. All right, next up we have Hudson at Clinton. We just talked about Hudson. Jake Attaway and company take on a Clinton team that, talking to some people around the state, thinks could be the favorite in D7 this year. This is a great early season matchup in Central Mass. We're going to be there for that one. Just some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, it should be a fun one. It's going to be one of the better small school games of not just this week, but of the entire season. And Hudson, I think they're one of the 2 or 3 favorites in Division 6. Clinton, one of the 3 or 4 favorites in Division 7. So this is going to be an awesome game. I think Clinton, we've talked about it a couple times on the show, like I don't think Clinton was quite getting the respect they deserved over the last couple of years until they came east and beat Rockland by 40 in the playoffs last year. I think that was kind of an eye-opening win, especially for a lot of people in Eastern Mass. So I think Clinton's, again, D7's wide open this year. There's no Uxbridge of last season this year, so it's a wide-open division. I think Clinton's going to compete in that division. But ultimately, Hudson's probably one of the top 25-ish most talented teams in the state, regardless of division. Very talented team. Attaway, of course, he just scored his 100th career touchdown. Great milestone for him. They got Giorgio Nartanowicz. They have a bunch of pieces back from that team last year. So I think Hudson's just a little too skilled. I wouldn't be surprised if they won this game by multiple scores, but that doesn't mean Clinton's not a very good team in their own right.
Yeah, that race in D6 with Fairhaven, Hudson, among others, is going to be fascinating to watch as the rest of the season plays out. Yeah, this one's a tough one to predict. I think Clinton is certainly a favorite in D7. And like you said, it's wide open. They're in a good spot, but they got to win this one. I think if they lose this game, they could end up losing some momentum going into the rest of their schedule. Now, if they win this one, I don't think a lot of people realize how good Clinton is. I think if Clinton does win this game, now that's going to get people's attention. I'm going to lean Hudson here, but I think it's going to be a pretty good game. And I've actually coached at Clinton's home field when I was coaching in the EFL when they had the Clinton Irish Blizzard semi-pro football team. it's a quaint, great place to watch a game. They've got a nice little home field advantage here. I think this is going to be a really good matchup. All right, next up we have Billerica at Masconomet. Masco coming off a big win over Newburyport last week. Billerica returns quarterback Steve Gentile, and look, Dwayne Sigsbury has built that program back up there like the Billerica of old when Peter Flynn was there. Indians are once again among the favorites in D3. This is a good early season test for them.
Yeah, I think we're doing that preseason show, and I think I picked Billerica to win the division. I would say right now it's probably between Billerica and Milford in my eyes as the best team in that division. Billerica, of course, they didn't play last week, so they were one of the many teams really around the state that used that bye week in week one. Masco, I was pretty surprised. I honestly didn't have the highest of expectations for them this year. They're a little young, but they really opened my eyes when they beat Newburyport the way they did. Newburyport's been a pretty consistent program over the years. I think Masco's good. Again, I think this is another team that's going to compete for a playoff berth, but I just think Billerica really has the upper hand here. They have a little bit of skill returning. They have a good line returning. Sigsbury's a great offensive mind, so I like the Indians.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Indians here as well. Like you said, Masco's young, and I think that this Billerica team is poised to make not only a run in the MVC, but to make a run in Division III. They're amongst the favorites, and this could be the year that they finally break through. I think Sigs has got this program in a place now where you expect them to be a state title contender. They're back, and so I think that they're going to be a tough out week in and week out. One thing we know about Billerica, they always start strong, at least they have in the last few years. A little bit of a fade down the stretch. They got to avoid that fade. But I think they get off to a good start here with a hard-fought win over Masco. All right, next up we have Braintree at Dartmouth. The Womps losing to Weymouth last week, 21-0. They take on Jackson Hart and a talented Dartmouth team. That's another team to keep an eye on as well in D3. Look, for Braintree, I think that this is a program that, when you look at this team, going into the season, you bring back James Curry, a lot of offense there. They were one of those sleeper teams in the Bay State League. Last week was a disappointing result for Lee Carlson's team. They got to bounce back. It's going to be tough to do it, though, having a fairly long bus ride down to Dartmouth to take on a very good, very talented Dartmouth team.
Yeah, Dartmouth is another one of these teams that's going to compete in Division III. They were a quarterfinalist team last year. I don't think it surprised anyone if they take that a step further and become a semifinal team this year in Division III. You mentioned Jackson Hart, right? Graham, ran for almost 300 yards last week in their opener. So I think Dartmouth's probably the more talented team. Braintree, I was a bit surprised. Everybody talks about Curry coming back, but I thought Braintree was going to be kind of a sneaky good playoff team in Division I. So I think that, again, this is another team that had a humbling loss last week. We'll see how they rebound. It's a very important game for Braintree specifically, as they have to rebound here and start stacking together some wins. I think I like Dartmouth here. It should be competitive. I don't see Braintree losing by 21 again or anything like that. But I like Dartmouth, by a touchdown.
Braintree's got to get the offense going, and I know you want to feature James Curry and get him the ball, but they've got to be able to run stuff off of him in the running game. They got to show that they can do that this week. I think that they play better, but I'm going with Dartmouth here as well. All right, next up, we have a pretty interesting matchup here. Brockton at Barnstable. Barnstable coming off a week 0, whatever we're calling it in Massachusetts high school football these days, week 1, week 0. They come off an opening week win over BR. Look, Brockton has a new coach in Jilson Silva. They had a good summer. Expectations are high there. We know that the school is certainly big enough. The program, we know about the history and the tradition. We know there's athletes there. We know there's size there. Silva's a guy who played at Brockton. He gets Brockton. He can get this program going. The expectations aren't that high. They were much higher last year when Jermaine Wiggins came to town. They're not as high this year, but that's okay. If you have lower expectations, that helps you build a program if you're Silva. This will be a tough matchup for them, though, going down the Cape to take on a Barnstable team that is young, but as you know, Coach Chad Cole has done a good job there building a program. They're going to be in the playoff mix once again in D2.
They will be in the playoff mix once again. I picked against them last week, and I just was kind of unsure about some of the pieces they had coming back, but they had a two-headed monster in the backfield last week. They They ran combined for almost 200 yards, I believe. Again, that win over BR. So I think this game will be like much closer than it was last year. Like last year, Barnstable won by 5 or 6 touchdowns against Brockton. So I think it'll be closer. Similar to what was 2 years ago. I was at the game 2 years ago in Barnstable when Brockton won a low-scoring game. It was like 14-7, something like that. I think it'll be a little bit more high-scoring, but I think it will be close. Another one-possession game, I could see something like that. I think Karan Ford, ultimately, he's probably the best player in this game. I think he makes a difference. I like Barnstable 20-14, something like that.
Yeah, I think it'll be a close game once again. I don't even know if it's going to go, if the score's going to be that high. I could see a 14-12 kind of game. I'm going to go Barnstable as a home team here in a close one. I'll go with that score. I'll go 14-12. But I think Brockton, they've beefed up the schedule. It's a program to keep an eye on. I think Silva can get it going there. He just has to get the buy-in. By all accounts, they had a good summer. The kids are buying in. They know him. He's been on staff, played there. So certainly there's a connection there that I think is a strong one, and it can help the program. All right, next up we have Franklin at Wachusett. Franklin coming off a tough 21-14 loss to Central Catholic last week. This will be Wachusett's first game of the season. This has been a nice little rivalry. I covered this game a couple of years ago when Tucker McDonald was at Wachusett. Look, I think if you're Franklin, if you're Todd Kiley, you've got to be very pleased with the resolve and the resiliency your team showed in the second half of that game last week. This is a young Franklin team at a lot of key spots. They've got some size up front, but they've got a lot of young guys that are expected to step up and fill some key roles for them at the skill positions. If I'm Todd Kiley, you have to be pretty happy with the second half of that game. If you can carry that over into this week, they can go to Wachusett and beat the Mountaineers, a Wachusett program that Coach Dubzinski has made a perennial contender in Central Mass. This should be a pretty good game.
Yeah, Wachusett has been a perennial contender, a perennial playoff team. Other than last year, I think they really struggled last year. I expect them to bounce back. I expect them to have a better year. I think Franklin's probably still a playoff team in Division One. They lost a lot. They're a younger team, obviously had a coaching change. But you mentioned the resolve, the resiliency in that game against Central Catholic. They could have, it was a long trip, week one. They could have folded it up and lost that game by 4 scores. Instead, they have a chance at the end of the game to tie and send it to overtime. So I think Franklin, they're going to get better as the year goes on. They're a talented group. I'm happy to see that the war package followed Todd Kiley from Holliston to Franklin. So they'll be mixing up the offense. There'll be multiple. I like to see that. I think they will get the first win of the Todd Kiley era this week, something like 24-14, 28-14.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think if they can carry over the momentum that they established in the second half of that game against Central Catholic, they should be fine. This is a tough one for me. I mean, Wachusett is a program that, 2 years ago, you had Tucker McDonald. They made a nice run there. Last year, they took a step back. A lot of the guys that played last year are back. They have a pretty good team back. They're at home. I'm going to go Wachusett here. And I know the Franklin faithful isn't going to like that very much, but I'm going to go Wachusett. I think that this is a close game, but they're at home. I think that they sneak by here. I could see this being a 21-18 kind of game. But I'm going to go Wachusett here in a mild upset for Central Mass. All right, next up we have Linfield at North Attleboro. Linfield hasn't played yet. North Attleboro is coming off an impressive win over Lynn Classical. And look, when we talk about D3 favorites, we got to talk about North Attleboro, man, because I don't think enough people are talking about them. You've got Chase Fasoli back at quarterback. You got Bannon back at running back and linebacker. Kaiser at wide receiver. I mean, this is a North team that has some talent and experience back. Let's not sleep on them. This should be a pretty good matchup.
It will be a pretty good matchup. And it's one of these kind of unique matchups that you never really predict would ever happen. And they played last year, and it was a competitive game. North definitely is a team that's kind of flying under the radar here. Again, similar to Mansfield, I think Mike Strachan's probably going to like that. This team's flying under the radar. For Soli, you can't teach that experience, obviously. 4-year starter now for North. Ben is one of the better two-way players in the state. So I think this is going to be a competitive game again. I think Linfield's a team that's kind of another team that's kind of flying under the radar here. Division 3, Division 6 are kind of similar in ways where they're wide open and they're very deep. There's a legitimately 5 or 6 teams that could win the division. So I think the Pioneers, I think they'll keep it close for a bit. I think North just has a little too big. That size is going to kind of lean on Linfield as the game goes on. I think it'll be competitive, though, but I like North by a touchdown.
Yeah, I like North too. And Linfield's got to make the drive. Of course, North did it last year. They went up there and won up there. Big win over Lynn Classical. They did the drive last week. I think that game is a pretty good indication of how good this North team can be. I think they're pretty good. I think they win this game by a couple of scores. I'm going to go North here to improve to 2-0 on the season. All right, next up we have Methuen at Marshfield. Marshfield coming off a tough 42-20 loss to St. John's Prep. Methuen coming off a big win to kick off the regular season there. Shane Eason had a big game for the Rangers. When we talk about the public schools in D1, the conversation starts with Springfield Central. Then you go to Needham. Then it's kind of everybody else. Do you put Methuen in that conversation? Because, yeah, they graduate Drew Eason and a talented senior class, but you bring back a talented senior class. Are the Rangers – are we selling them a little short here? Or should they be in the conversation as a possible contender in D1?
I think so. I really do. Like, I think there's been like a clearly defined top four. You mentioned Central and Needham, and then you have the two Catholics, St. John's Prep and Xaverian. I think that's kind of been the consensus top four throughout the offseason. But Methuen, listen, you can't replace Drew Eason. Like, that wasn't ever going to happen. But his brother Shane is arguably the best player in the state. He's arguably the most dynamic offensive weapon in the state. And you saw that last week, racked up over 200 yards. I expect that to honestly be a weekly occurrence, as crazy as that sounds. Like, he's going to push for 2,000 all-purpose yards this year. So I think Methuen is being sold short a little bit. I think they are a contender in Division I again. I wouldn't be surprised, if we are sitting here in November and they're a semifinalist in Division I again. Coach Ryan's done a great job with the program. I think there should be a lot of fireworks in this game. We talk almost weekly about how Chris Aruka and the pace that Marshfield team plays with. They're going to have a chip on their shoulder coming off that ugly loss last week to the Prep. So I think it'll be close. Again, this is another one of these games where it's a long bus ride for Methuen. So I think it's going to be a shootout. I just think Eason is going to give the Rams fits. So I like the Rangers 35-28. And I will be there for that one. So I'm looking forward to that one on Friday night.
Yeah, that should be a really good game. And look, Marshfield could score. I mean, we talk about that skill group all the time. They ran into a little bit of a buzzsaw last week with Chris Vargas in that St. John's Prep passing game. But I expect this to be a high-scoring game. Methuen is more than just Shane Eason. They've got a really good group back. I'm going to lean Methuen here too. But again, you've talked about this, and I think it's so true. When you play Marshfield, that pace becomes a problem. They play fast, and they'll end up with 60, 65 plays in a game potentially if their defense can get stops. So, I think, to me, can Methuen hang on? Can Methuen play at that pace? Because if they can win this game. But if they can't and Marshfield jumps on them early, now all of a sudden the Rams are favored here. This is a toss-up to me. I'm leaning Methuen, but this is a hard one for me. I'm going to take the worst way out on this one, I think. Because I still think Marshfield's a good program. They're a good football team. I know they lost a couple of key guys that transferred. They graduated some key guys up front. But we always talk about that skill core that they have with Moss and True and Carroll. That's a good crew. And I think that they're good enough to score enough points to win a shootout against Methuen. So I'm going to pull a John Kerry and sit on the fence on this one. All right, next up we have Milford and Leominster. Milford coming off an impressive 35-6 win over a good Westfield team. They take on Osiris Lopez and the Blue Devils. Blue Devils beat St. John Shrewsbury last week. Again, we talk about Division I teams that are kind of flying under the radar. I think you can put Leominster in that conversation as well. The key for them is going to be, do they have enough pieces around Lopez to potentially contend? This will be a pretty good litmus test for both of these teams, right? Like, if you're Milford, that's a good Leominster program. It'll give you an idea if you can play with some of the better teams in your league. And if you're Leominster, you get a win against Milford, who's a favorite in D3. That could be a nice little springboard for the Blue Devils.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is going to be a really fun game. I think, Milford kind of played Westfield evenly early on in that game and then really wore them down and broke through and ended up pulling away. But I think that Milford, I just said it not too long ago when we were talking about Billerica. I think Milford's the favorite or co-favorite in Division III with Billerica. Leominster, I wouldn't be surprised if they're a top 8 seed in Division I this year. Lopez, arguably the best quarterback in the state. So I think both of these are playoff teams here, but Milford ultimately, I know the numbers are low, and we're going to talk about that throughout the year. And, we'll see what kind of toll that takes on the roster throughout the season. But just the top end talent, that they're going to play good defense, but the Olsen twins coaching, they're going to have good line play. And then Jack Buckley is really a difference maker when he's healthy. I saw them in the playoff game against Walpole last year. They have Buckley, and that kind of altered or even ruined their identity from last year's team. Buckley's a very good player. Andrew Rivera is one of the better two-way players in the state. So I think ultimately Milford probably is deeper, something you mentioned. Do the Blue Devils have the skill around Lopez to compete? And I think they do. I think they're a good team. But I just think Milford has too much top-end talent compared to Leominster. So I like the Scarlet Hawks.
Yeah, I'm going to go Milford in this one too. And I think Devin Gates has done a tremendous job at Leominster. And like I said, this will be a measuring stick game for them. I think Milford is a little better, and that proves to be the difference here. I think this will be a good game, and I think it'll be a close game, but I'm going to lean with the Scarlet Hawks in this one. All right, next up, we've got a really good matchup in Central Mass. We have Ken LaChapelle's and Northbridge Rams that take on Mike Ross and West Boylston, two coaching legends in Central Mass. This should be a great game. Always one of the marquee smaller school matchups in the state.
Yeah, I think Northbridge, like kind of the last few years, they're flying under the radar, which is like something I don't think that should ever be the case with the LaChapelle team. So I think the Rams, they're not where they were like a decade ago, say, but they are still a good team. West Boylston, it's tough to bet against Mike Ross in that double wing offense. So until somebody in Central Mass beats them or in the state beats them, I got to pick the Lions.
Yeah, me too. I mean, they graduated a lot from those back-to-back D7 and D8 Super Bowl teams. But, I mean, again, Mike Ross has built a program there now that, again, as I said earlier, they don't rebuild, they reload. They have a good, strong feeder system, and they have talent coming up. And this is a contrast in styles. You got a team in West Boylston that wants to run the football and control the clock, and then you got Northbridge who wants to spread it out and throw it. That's kind of been their MO through the years. So it's going to be a fun game to watch in that regard. But I think it's an intriguing matchup indeed. All right, next up we have Walpole at Foxborough. Walpole coming off a 42-14 loss to KP. Foxborough coming off a heartbreaking loss, 21-14 to Scituate. They lost on the last play of the game after a second was added on the clock. And Scituate was able to convert a Hail Mary with Lawson Foley making the play. Look, I think when you look at this game, I think coming into the season, we all agreed Foxborough's the favorite in D5. Walpole, we had some question marks about. They graduated a lot of talent, but they did bring back a good receiving core and quarterback Noah McKenzie. Both of these teams are coming off tough losses. Both of them need a win. I mean, it's early in the year, but this should be a pretty good game between two teams that, quite frankly, can ill afford to go 0-2.
Yeah, I think so. First off, I was at that game, Foxborough at Sedgwick last week, and both of those teams are very impressive. Foxborough is a very good team, especially for Division 5. You're just not going to see teams with that much size, speed, and strength at that level. Walpole, again, they're a team that lost a ton from last year. But again, McKenzie and Lopez are probably the two best quarterbacks returning in the state. Listen, KP, they're kind of a different beast there. And that defense, again, Walpole's not going to play a defense as good as King Phillips. So I think this is going to be a very competitive game. I think Foxborough is the favorite in Division 5. Walpole's going to be a playoff team in Division 3. I'll be interested to see how Foxborough handles the passing attack. They were beat a couple times by Lawson Foley. Last Friday, he had 3 catches, but he totaled over 100 yards and had 2 touchdowns, including that Hail Mary winner that you mentioned. So I think this is going to be a fun one. An interesting thing here, Ben Angelini, he was sidelined last week. No timetable for his return, so I'm not sure if he'll be back this week or not. That could be a big storyline here to watch out for as we get through the season with Foxborough. they're still pretty loaded though, right? Marcusella and Gordon, like they've got a lot of talent. They have very good line play. I thought John Sacchetti kind of filled in nicely in the backfield last week. Ryan Foley played a really good two-way game for Foxborough. So I think Foxborough still has a ton of players. I think they're a legitimate top 20 team in the state, regardless of division. I think they're going to be hungry after last week and kind of how things went there and towards the end of the game against Scituate. So again, you mentioned both of these teams kind of need a win. You don't want to start 0-2, but I think Walpole's going to start 0-2 here. I just think Foxborough is a little more talented collectively.
Yeah, I agree. I think Foxborough is a little bit more talented collectively. I think that even without Angelini, they have enough depth that they could certainly score. And I think that they have the skill on the back end defensively to match up against those three receivers that Walpole's going to throw out at you. I think this is a good game. I think it's a close game, but I'm going with the Warriors here as well. We're going to go a little rapid fire here with the rest of the games. Another game we're going to be at this week. West Springfield at Minneshaug should be a pretty good matchup. It's the marquee matchup this week in Western Mass.
This should be good. I think both of these teams have really good quarterback play returning. West Side has some underrated skill returning. I think both of these teams are going to end up in the Division III playoffs. I think Jack Lucarell is probably the best quarterback in Western Mass outside of Jared Stain. So I've got the Falcons here.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Falcons here as well, and which should be a really, really good game. And you mentioned these are two teams that are going to fly under the radar in D3, but I think come November, they're going to be players in the D3 playoffs. Next up, we have Westwood at Weymouth. Westwood did not play last week. Weymouth coming off a 21-0 win over Braintree. Cam Aietta with a big game there for the Wildcats. You know, when we talk about the Bay State League, let's not forget about Mike Donovan's Wildcats. I mean, he turned that program around last year. We know how big that school is. We know the kind of talent they have there. He's got it going. They are in a pretty good spot here to potentially start 2-0.
Yeah, we talked about it last week before that Braintree game. Ayat is one of the better two-way players in the state. I think he's going to make you have his hands in pretty much everything for this team again. I was really impressed with the Wildcats' defense last week, so I like Weymouth here. I think they start 2-0.
Yeah, me too. I think ultimately Westwood's got some pretty good skill. They'll be in the mix of the Tri-Valley Large, but I think you mentioned I had one of the best two-way players in the game. I think for me, I think this Weymouth team, they've got it going now. They've got their mojo back. They're physical up front. They can run the football. They're playing good defense. You know, like I said, Aietta's leading the way. He might be the best two-way player in the state. This is a really good program. I think Westwood's going to run into some matchup problems here. I'm going to go with Weymouth in this one. Next up, we have Central out of Providence traveling to Milton to take on Steve Dombrowski's Wildcats. Of course, Milton coming off a tough 24-0 loss to Needham. Central's coming off a win over Manchester, New Hampshire. This should be a pretty good game here. Central's got some speed. Mike Washington, good coach. He's built a good program there. They got some speed. They got guys that can run. This should be a pretty interesting interstate matchup.
It will be an interesting one. And you mentioned that Central played Manchester last week. They also play Somerset Berkeley the night before Thanksgiving. So they have 3 out-of-state games. Again, I can't say how much I love that. I hope we see more of that across New England. But I think this is another team that's really going to have a chip on their shoulder coming off of last week. Humbling loss to Needham. Not just that they lost to Needham. Needham's a very good team, as we've talked about, but getting shut out, and that just doesn't happen to this Milton program. Doesn't happen to Steve Dombrowski offenses. So I think the Wildcats rebound. They kind of got a game under their, So I think it's gonna be a good game. I think ultimately you're gonna see Milton kind of put up like 28 points again, like something we're more accustomed to seeing. So I lean Milton here, like 28-20.
Yeah, I'm going to go Milton, too. I think they win by a couple of scores. I could see this being a 28-14 kind of game. Central will hang in there. Milton's trying to find their way. They will. Dombrowski's a good coach. He's going to figure it out with that offense. They'll get it going. This will be a good test for him, though. This Central team does pose some matchup problems on the perimeter with their skill. I'm going to go Milton here. Like I said, 28-14 kind of game. All right, next up we have Londonderry travels to Danvers to take on St. John's Prep, and what should be a pretty good game. Londonderry, of course, led by Jimmy Lozon, is Division I in New Hampshire. They beat Chumps for pretty good last year. The Lancers are used to winning games in Massachusetts. They've done it before. New Hampshire has had success against Massachusetts in these cross-state games. St. John's Prep, I don't know. What can you say about Chris Vargas? Impressive performance last week in his debut. Throwing a Merrick Barlow. I mean, this team looks like at least 1 week in, they look like they could be the potential favorite in D1. Londonderry, good line play, strong up front, good offense, well coached, but I'm not sure they have enough to beat the Prep.
Yeah, I think Londonderry, Pinkerton, and some of these other teams from New Hampshire and Maine, like these teams can compete with Division I programs in Massachusetts. We saw that last week, obviously in that Andover game. But I think, listen, Londonderry is always going to be top 2 or 3 favorite in Division I in New Hampshire. That's no different this year. But you mentioned Vargas, Barlow, the freshman Riley Selvis. Like they've got a ton of talent. Of course, they have great line play as always. So I think St. John's Prep there is too talented, and that's really the case for most teams in New England and most teams that they're going to play this week. So give me the Eagles here by a couple scores.
Yeah, our Kevin Stone is going to be at that one. I'm going to go with St. John's Prep as well. Londonderry, though, they're good enough to hang in there. They could hang in there for a little bit, but I just think ultimately St. John's Prep is a little bit more talented. Next up, we have St. John Shrewsbury traveling down to Providence to take on LaSalle Academy. LaSalle went toe-to-toe with BC High last week in a really good game at home. The Rams, Jeff Marcone, he's not afraid to schedule people and play people. This should be a pretty good game. Coach Vassar, he's got St. John Shrewsbury going here. This is a game where they could be pretty evenly matched. I think St. John Shrewsbury is primed to get better as the year goes on and surprise people. They can pick up a win here this week against one of the power programs in Rhode Island. That would be pretty good.
Yeah, I think LaSalle was a little young last year, and they kind of fell short of their lofty expectations. Like they were still a top 3 team in Rhode Island, so that just lets you know how high the bar is down there at LaSalle. They're a very good team, very good program. I think it's going to be low scoring like the BC High game last week, but ultimately I think St. John's Shrewsbury, they're like similar to Central Catholic in my eyes, where they're still a year, maybe 2 or 3 years away from really competing.
Really good freshman team.
Yeah, you had mentioned that. So I think they're a team to monitor, a team to look out for in the future. I just think they're a little too inexperienced right now. LaSalle has more talent overall. So I like LaSalle here, 14-7, something like that.
Yeah, they're going to play a lot of low-scoring games this year, the Rams. It's just the way it is. Of course, they won the Super Bowl 2 years ago, but I do think this will be another one of those low-scoring games. I'm leaning LaSalle here as well. I think ultimately – it's a defensive struggle. I think LaSalle ends up winning 21-7, 17-14, that kind of game. But I agree. I think St. John Shrewsbury is on their way. They're probably a year away, despite the fact that they have a pretty good senior class. All right, we're going to shift gears here now and go up to Vermont. Champlain Valley Union at Colchester. Both teams are 2-0. CVU has looked pretty good so far. They've been one of the better programs in Vermont in recent years. This is going to be a pretty good test for them, though. Colchester is a pretty good program, good skill. They've proven that they could score and play with the big boys in Vermont. I'm going to go Champlain Valley Union here. I think it'll be a good game, but I think ultimately they're the more talented team. They pull away. Who do you like in this one, Tyler?
Yeah, I like CVU as well. I think they beat up on Essex last week, and you had mentioned that they've kind of they're kind of emerging as one of the top teams in Vermont. I think that's going to be the case again this year. So I'm in agreement with you.
All right, next up we go back to Rhode Island. We have a game that we're going to be covering. Our Charlie Adams is going to be at this one. Barrington at Cumberland. Really good game between two of the better teams in D1, not named Hendricken and LaSalle. Barrington made the move up. Cumberland made the move up. Both teams have good talent back. Barrington has to replace Alex McClellan at quarterback, but this is going to be a really good matchup and a game that I think in many ways could be a kind of a roadmap to the rest of the season in D1. Again, Hendricken will be the favorite, but I think you've got some good public schools in that mix that could possibly challenge them as the year goes on.
I think I lean Cumberland here. Again, like these two teams plus North Kingstown, there's a good mix of publics in Rhode Island that could really compete and emerge as the top team or top 2 team in the state this year. I lean Cumberland, but Cumberland gauntlet of a schedule to start. They got this game against Barrington, then they got Hendricken, then they make a trip up to Reading, Mass to play them. So it's a brutal start for them, but I think they get out off to a hot start here and beat Barrington.
Yeah, I mean, Sandy Gorham, he always finds a way to get his teams to compete. I think Barrington's a tough first game for Cumberland, but I think when you look at that Cumberland senior class, they got a lot of experience back. I think ultimately that proves to be the difference. I think this is going to be a really good game, but I'm going to go Cumberland here in a close one. I'm going to say Cumberland wins a 21-17 kind of game. All right, next up, we have a huge New Hampshire-Maine cross rivalry game when Bedford travels to Thornton Academy on Saturday. Bedford, the back-to-back Division I state champs in New Hampshire, taking on Thornton Academy, who is the defending Class A champion in Maine. Of course, Thornton Academy has been the signature program in Maine for a long time. Trojans, they're back at it again, one of the best teams in Maine. They're the favorite again in Class A. This is a great matchup. Again, it'll take place at Thornton Academy up in Saco, Maine. I think that this could be the best high school game of the weekend in New England. I mean, I think it's going to be fantastic. That Bedford defense, you talk about KP's defense, Bedford plays as good a defense as anybody in the region. This is going to be a fun one.
It is going to be a fun one, and I'm happy you mentioned the defense. It's been their calling card the last few years. I feel like when I talk about teams like Duxbury, West Boylston, Massachusetts, like until I see somebody beat them, I can't pick against them. I feel similarly in this one. I think Bedford gets it done. I think that defense shines again, something like 17-10, a low-scoring game, but I got Bedford.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because I think Bedford is well-positioned again. Coach Matthews has them in a good spot where they're well-positioned again to make another run in D1. And when you look at D1 in New Hampshire this year, it's them, it's Londonderry, it's Pinkerton, it's wide open. But, man, this Thornton Academy team is a wagon. And I think at home on a Saturday afternoon, early season, that's a tough trip. I think, look, Bedford has a lot on the line here in terms of winning streak, back-to-back state titles, the whole nine. It's hard to pick against them here. I'm with you because I think they play really good defense and they can score when they need to on offense. It'll be interesting to see if they're as explosive as they've been the last couple of years. I'm going to lean Thornton Academy here, but man, this one's a tough one. This one's a tough one to pick. And, of course, Connecticut kicks off this week as well. Tomorrow night, they have a slate of games. They kick off. We're going to have a bunch of Connecticut stuff up the next couple of days for our Connecticut football fans. Big game down there this weekend. There's two, really, and I'm going to add a game real quick. There's two games to look at there. The first one is Greenwich at West Haven. Nick Conlon is back at quarterback for West Haven. This is a big early season game. Greenwich looking to get back on track after last year. They didn't quite live up to the hype there, but I look, you're talking about two teams that are going to be in the mix for the Class LL state title. These are two of your top contenders. This should be a fantastic matchup.
I think it will be a fantastic matchup, and I think we've talked about a little bit about Greenwich earlier and how they're playing Hendricken this year, so they're challenging themselves from a scheduling perspective, which I love to see. I do think Greenwich kind of gets back again to that standard that they've set here, to that expectation that they expect. I think it's going to be an awesome game, but I lean Greenwich by one score. Could be a touchdown, could be a field goal, but it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, West Haven won this game 26-13 last year. I think they're on a mission. I think that loss to Staples in that Class LL title game, while they graduate a lot, they do return a lot, especially up front. And I mentioned Conlon. I think he's on a mission, 4-year starter. I think he wants to go out on a high note. This is a legacy season for him. It's tough to pick against West Haven in this one, and I'm not going to be the guy to do it. I'm going to go West Haven here at home. I think it's going to be a closer game than last year, but I'm going West Haven. And the other game that we're going to talk about in Connecticut is New Canaan at Maloney. I mean, heavyweight matchup to start the season. I mean, you can't ask for a better matchup than that in Class L. Two programs. New Canaan is the standard in Class L. Of course, Darien. Many people think they're the best team in the state. They're going to be right there with them in Class L. Maloney's got a lot of skill, a team that while they did graduate some key components from last year's team, they bring back a really good skill group. That's going to be a really fun matchup. I'm not sure I'm ready to pick against Coach Marinelli's Rams, though. It's New Canaan. You know what I mean? That it's hard to pick against them. They just know how to win big games. I'm going to go New Canaan here, but I'm telling you, that Maloney skill group might be the best in the state of Connecticut.
It should be a good game, and I think it'll be kind of low scoring and similar to last year. I do believe in the New Canton defense, so I think they're going to pull it out something a little bit higher scoring than last year, something like 20-14, 21-14.
Yeah, it's going to be a fantastic matchup. I'm so fired up for Connecticut football starting, and of course we hope to have more boots on the ground there. We will cover all the state title games. We hope to have more boots on the ground during the regular season. Get you more Connecticut coverage. I mean, it is fantastic football, and it's on par with Massachusetts. And we're excited to take on a bigger role down there and cover some of the best programs in New England. Really, when you're talking about New Canaan, Darien, West Haven, Greenwich, New Haven. Maloney. I mean, these are. That's why I want to see Massachusetts Connecticut matchups. I think it would be fantastic if you started getting some of those matchups, because now it's big boys versus big boys. Be good stuff. All right. Any final thoughts here on week 2?
No, just get out there and enjoy some games. There were a lot of good ones around the state last week, but that's going to continue throughout the season. So just get out there and enjoy some football.
There's a lot of great games this weekend, folks, in the entire region, and we just went over the top matchups in Massachusetts and the rest of New England. Get out there and watch these games. I mean, you've got some slobber knockers. I don't want to sound like Jim Ross, but you've got some slobber knockers there with Bedford Thornton Academy. You got Greenwich West Haven. You got New Haven Maloney. You got Londonderry St. John's Prep, Barrington Cumberland. I mean, there's so many great games out there. Get out there and support these kids. I mean, there's nothing like high school football. It's the best high school sport there is, and these kids love playing under the lights on Friday nights. So get out there and support them. Tyler, you are truly one of the best in the business, my friend. We are so fortunate to have you working with us here at New England Football Journal, and let's do this again next week.
Let's do it.
All right. That'll do it for this week's episode of the High School Preview Show. For Tyler Amaral, I'm John